Thank you so much for joining us today for our Leadership in Changing Times series. I'm Phil Reeves. I'm an assistant director with the Integrated Marketing and Communications Department here at the NYU School of Professional Studies. I am delighted to introduce our speakers that we have today. First, we have our NYU professor, Mr. Tariq Khan. Tariq has a very distinguished 20-year career in the business industry. In 2010, he founded his company, Global Diversity Marketing, here in New York. Is a leading management and consulting firm that has helped global Fortune companies and C-suite leaders adapt and thrive in their changing environments. And we are so lucky that we've had him as a faculty member here at NYU since 2005. He has also recently published a book called Leadership in Changing Times that was the spur for this great series that we're getting to continue this year. And I'm very grateful that he's brought with him Eric Boester, and we're so excited to hear the fireside chat and discussion they'll have today. Tariq and Eric will speak together for a little while today, and then at the end, we'll have a time for a Q&A session for you to chime in with your questions for the two of them as well. So please feel free to use the Q&A function during the meeting throughout as you have questions that come in, and we'll get to them later. So Tariq, take it away.
Thank you, Phil, for the nice introduction. And I want to thank NYU and the entire our team, Robin, Patrick, and Phil, for the support they have provided. I'm very thankful to Eric Boester, who is a friend also and Chief Marketing Officer of the NFP, which is one of the leading insurance and brokerage companies. When I was writing the book, Eric was pretty helpful in looking at the content, and he has helped me. But Eric and I have known each other for a few years, and then we had some interesting discussion over the pandemic. So Eric, thank you so much for being a part of this webinar. And I would like to start for the audience that leadership has completely a different look post-pandemic world. And I think there has never been a time in history when the global leadership at every level, business, political, professional, has been challenged like we all went through the pandemic. So let's just start with your own personal leadership journey, how you got here, and if you can start really as when you entered the workforce for the first time, how you went through all different tracks, and how you end up here being a chief marketing officer for one of the leading insurance companies.
Yeah, sure, Tariq, thanks. It's great to see you again, and I wish we could do this in person. So when you ask how did we get here, I guess the simple answer is a global pandemic. It would be nice to be in person, but now everything seems to be via Zoom. So it would be great to see everybody in person, but I do appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. I think to kind of walk through a little bit of my background and history, I think about some defining moments in my life. And it started actually kind of before I even started my career. Tariq, we've talked about this historically, but I grew up in Denver, Colorado. My folks had put me in a diversity program back then during elementary school. And so I spent some time at several different schools growing up. And I think that really kind of gave me an interesting perspective. One of the schools was Del Pueblo Elementary School, which was probably about 80% Hispanic community. One school was my neighborhood school in my neighborhood. And then I went into middle school, and I started at Cole Middle School, which was probably about 80% African American. And I think that, my folks kind of took a chance in terms of putting me in that diversity program, and it really gave me a really decent appreciation for kind of different perspectives and people from different backgrounds. And it really opened my eyes growing up in Denver, Colorado, to a lot of different thought processes and people of different kind of cultural backgrounds and different perspectives on kind of things in the industry and growing up. So, that was very kind of foundational for me in my upbringing and kind of how I think about things. The other kind of defining moment I would say in my background is as I got a little bit older, we moved to Connecticut, and I think I missed Colorado quite a bit. So I went back out to University of Colorado at Boulder, graduated with an economics degree in 1996. And started my first career at Putnam Investments. So I did an internship at Putnam Investments in 1995. Went back, finished my senior year, and when I graduated, Putnam offered me a job in their sales and marketing department. So I took a role focused predominantly on sales, and worked my way up there for about 6 years to a wholesaler role that took me from Boston to St. Louis, and then on to Iowa. And I took over my first territory in Iowa. And that was a great step. It was a real good learning process in terms of understanding sales and relationship building and life on the road. Some advice I got at the time when I was at Putnam that I thought was extremely helpful in terms of helping me think about my career was one of the more senior wholesalers at the time sat me down and said, look, you've built a pretty decent career here already in 6 years, pretty rapidly growing up the corporate ladder. But this is a lifetime commitment here in terms of selling, and you can make decent money, but you're going to get into a position where further down the road, if you don't want to be on the road, 4 or 5 days a week away from your family, you might want to think about, taking on some different corporate roles or thinking differently about your career. If you want to be in sales the rest of your life, this is a great place to be, and it was a great opportunity. But at that point in time, it kind of gave me pause to think about what I really wanted to do in life. And so I ended up taking that advice, and I left Putnam when I was doing really well there, and I took a big risk leaving Putnam at that time because I didn't have a job lined up. And so I moved to Philadelphia. My girlfriend, now wife at the time, was starting her residency. And so I started looking around in Philadelphia and found NFP, and that was in 2001. And the second set of advice, which I think was really interesting, was I sat down with one of my best friend's father, who was working in New York at the time as a top executive at the American Stock Exchange. And I kind of explained to him my situation, said I was living in Philadelphia, but this great opportunity popped up in New York. And his advice to me at the time was, look, you're young enough in your career, you're going to want to be in an office, which is a little ironic in this day and age. You're going to want to be in an office, as much as you possibly can. You're going to want to show up early. You're going to want to work late. You want to kind of keep improving and showing up every day. And commuting from Philadelphia was, a good 2 hours each way. So his advice was that I didn't take the job at NFP. And I thought about it for a while, and I said to myself, I think I can do this. And so I always kind of compare and contrast those two really instrumental kind of points of advice in my career, where one I took and one I didn't. And I really think the advice that I didn't take, it actually turned out really well for me. I ended up, obviously having a long career here at NFP. I've been here for over 21 years. I started out more in an operations role, and then moved over to, in around 2007, I moved over to a strategy role, working with our Chief Operating Officer, Doug Hammond at the time, who you know very well, Tariq. And we focused a lot of our efforts at that time on better ways to use our capital, and really outside of our traditional acquisition model, but really how else could we use our capital at NFP, which was generating a lot of cash flow at the time. So we built this group up, and we started 2 businesses from the ground up at that time. But that was 2007. So kind of think about the time period then, and really kind of going into the financial crisis. Everything changed in 2008, and the company, really struggled. And we shut down acquisitions. We ended up laying off a bunch of people. We reorganized the whole company, and we paid down a bunch of debt at that time. And it was a really interesting time and challenging time to be kind of anywhere around financial services and working in business at that time. So there were a lot of one-off lessons learned through that whole process, but I do think, kind of working with the team, kind of working through those challenging times was really defining in terms of how we thought about pushing out decision-making process and trusting the employees around us and really working with, kind of leadership across the company. So those were key areas. The other thing I'd say is, as we came out of that, the company approached me about taking on the marketing role. And at that stage, I didn't really think that I had a future necessarily in marketing. It wasn't necessarily on my radar. But Doug Hammond, to his credit, and some others kind of sat me down and said, there are a few people in this organization that have the history and the understanding and kind of the balance across our disciplines of businesses. And if we're going to hire a chief marketing officer, we want you to take that role. And I always joke with my team, the best way to kind of get promoted is to say no to your CEO that you don't want the role. But at the end of the day, he turned around and they convinced me that it was the right role for me, and I'm really glad I did it. Probably the most impressive thing about kind of marketing and NFP is really the team around me. We've got now a team of about 50 employees across the company, spread out in Europe, Canada, the US, and it's just a fantastic team that really kind of helps me, day in and day out, show up and make NFP a great place to be.
Yeah, that's quite a story, Eric. And one thing that stood out is, from the traits of leadership, one thing that I saw that you did, which a lot of us at times shy away from, is you took the risk, right? And risk taking is one of the major traits of leaders. So, sometimes you're not sure, you're not confident about something, but you're confident about yourself. And I tell people so many times that not all chief marketing officers, even some of the best chief marketing officers, are not properly trained, marketers who have only held marketing jobs. These are the people who really ran the line businesses and they come into it. So quite an interesting story. The next question that I have is, you mentioned the 2007 and 2008 recession. And those of us who were in the workforce at that time, we thought that's the end of the world. And after this, nothing worse can happen. And then January 2020 came, and then we were hit with this pandemic. And I remember you were one of the few people who were regularly or at least regularly going to the office or trying to go to the office as well. But now, let's fast forward it more than 2.5 years. We are inching towards some of the normalcy or, the world that we had before, although we would never go back to pre-pandemic world. But what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that you saw? And I know NFP as a company, and I would also request you to just give us like a 30-second commercial about the company as well, what they do. How you guys really went through this tumultuous time and stayed together, because many companies faced, and especially in this industry, insurance and brokerage. So share some of your challenges and opportunities during the last 2.5 years that you've seen.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just a little bit about NFP real quick. NFP's a global insurance broker, and we've got a diversified offering. Our biggest business line is employee benefits, corporate benefits, which includes all traditional health and welfare, ancillary, voluntary benefits, as well as our executive benefits business. And that's about $1 billion of revenue for us right now. And then our second biggest business line is property and casualty, and that spans the gamut from all of our core capabilities in our specialty area, where we've built out some real great capabilities and expertise around specialty, property and casualty insurance, industry verticals, as well as a very robust personal risk group that focuses on individual homeowners, auto, et cetera, as well as private client group, higher end insurance. And then our third business
meeting is being recorded.
Oh, are you there, Tariq? Okay.
Please continue.
Yep. So, and then our third business line is focused on wealth management and retirement, and our asset-based businesses. And that obviously, all of those businesses kind of working in concert to make sure that corporations, as well as the individuals, the employees, and the folks that are involved in those corporations are all taken care of from soup to nuts in terms of kind of managing risk as well as their financial well-being. So that's a little bit about the company. We've got about 7,000 employees now globally, as I said. And I think that, that kind of sets the stage for what were some of the challenges that we faced during the pandemic. Thinking back to March of 2020, we were about to host our annual sales summit down in Austin, Texas. And that's where we bring in about 13 to 1,400, client-facing individuals within the organization to do 3 to 4 days of industry keynote speakers, training, government regulatory keynote speakers, kind of a whole breadth of great keynote speakers, as well as product and industry specific topics. 2020 March happened, and we made the very tough decision to cancel that meeting, as I think a lot of organizations were going through at that time. Everybody kind of weren't really sure how long this was going to last. We think back and how ironic it was that we all thought we'd be home for a couple weeks before we'd be back to the office, and it just didn't really pan out that way. So we quickly transitioned. I think some of the key things we did at that time was we quickly transitioned, at that point in time, probably about 6,500 employees to fully remote work from home. And kudos and a shout out to our HR team and our technology team that was able to lift that whole process and initiative up in such a short period of time. But one of the key components coming out of that, one of the biggest challenges, was how do you communicate with all those folks that were used to getting a lot of their information when they were showing up to an office every day? So, at that point in time, and this is why I credit a lot of my team for the success we've had, is I was able to step back and listen to what our team was talking about, and the idea of restructuring our whole communications function at that time really was something that came from our marketing leadership team out of Austin, where they kind of looked at the needs of the organization and said, hey, if we're going to communicate with 6,500 employees across this organization that are all working from home, we need to rethink how we're structuring our communications and our content. So we completely reorganized our whole distribution strategy around communications. There was a lot more at that point in time adoption of technology, quick adoption of technology and the systems that the company had put in place. And those things really, I think, led to the success of what the company experienced kind of going through the pandemic. We were able to communicate key initiatives. There were topics that ranged from obviously the health and safety of our employees, which we put first and foremost, which is why we transitioned everybody to a work from home. So we had to make sure we were communicating with folks around the HR resources that we had, from anywhere from mental wellness and mental support, because people were dealing with a lot at that time, to financial support, so financial wellness, and communicating all those benefits in terms of where people can go to get access to information about the new technology or tools or resources that they might be lacking if they're working from home and they're used to showing up and being able to leverage everything in an office. So we worked in concert with the HR and the technology team to make sure we were communicating out to all our employees. But then we also realized we needed to get out to all of our clients and customers. So we rethought how we were communicating all of NFP's capabilities and resources to our clients and customers. And we set up quickly resources on our website that went out to commercial clients as well as individual clients, everywhere from information around the PPE loans that could help small businesses to hotlines for people to call in terms of kind of their answers and questions to any of their employee benefits, commercial risk needs, or what have you. So it was a complete kind of overhaul, and it happened really quickly. And I think, sometimes a pandemic really does that. It allows you, it gives you an opportunity to make massive changes in terms of how you work day in and day out. That if we look back in terms of planning that out, I don't think we would have been able to do it unless you had kind of the challenges of a global pandemic going into that. And then the other thing I would just say to that is the other big challenge we had was checking in and making sure all of our employees were safe. Marketing is definitely an area that touches every aspect of our business. And since we were responsible for communications, that was the biggest thing. It was learning to pick up the phone, call and check on fellow colleagues, make sure that, everybody was dealing with the pandemic differently. You talked about how I was early on in the office. I think back to my personal experience living in New York City, having a wife in medicine at that time. She was going into the hospital every day, early stages, and not really knowing what was going on and how, healthy and safe she was going to be coming home. And we have 3 kids, and kind of me home managing 3 kids and online school, and her going into the hospital and coming home. It stressed me out quite a bit. I'm not going to lie to you. It was a challenging time, and I credit my wife to coming home one time and looking at me and saying, "I think it's time for you to go into an office. You need to get a break from the apartment in New York City." So I called up Doug Hammond at that time, and he said, "You know what? If you need to get into the office, that's fine. It's not open, but and living in New York City was a lot easier." So I was able to get in. And that helped. That helped dramatically. A change of scene and kind of freshness to kind of my thought process. But I do credit my team down in Austin and the leadership of the marketing team with really rethinking our communication strategy at that time, which really helped out.
No, that's great. And I do know of your personal challenges and how you were biking to the office at that time, because you can easily bike in Manhattan, especially.
Yeah.
So I truly believe that every challenge is an opportunity, right? And when you look at the pandemic, that's hopefully behind us. The human lives lost cannot never be replaced. But other than that, I think what pandemic has done, it's rebooted all of us, how we do business. Some people say it has taken us years backward. I think it has taken us years forward. And the things that we were thinking or planning of doing in 20 years, probably they're here now. So I want to ask next question, not as a NFP Chief Marketing Officer, but as a business leader, who sees the marketing world. People are spending a lot of their time on their smaller screens. They're not getting out of the office, getting out of the home, and they believe that's their cocoon, and they're very comfortable with it. In terms of the employee engagement, in terms of the consumer engagement, what are some of the marketing trends that you see how this would change going forward? The world that we had, the old traditional world where every time you want to do something, let's get in your car or walk out and go and see to a place. What are some of the current trends that you believe that were not there before, and the future what you see?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that one of the biggest things is, and it's not necessarily pandemic related, but it is how consumers research and kind of go through that buyer journey. There is a wealth, like you mentioned, of new technologies that are out there, and truly now in this day and age, some kind of call it older technologies, things like Slack, Workplace, Chatter, those type of platforms that allow people to share information internally within their organizations. I kind of view those as areas that, as true marketers, we can't really reach into those platforms to influence the conversation. So, there is a big change going on in terms of especially when you consider things like data privacy and people owning and controlling their own data. And how much they want to release out to companies to know about them as they start to research and do their background checks on whether it be individuals or companies. I think all of that is dramatically changing the business environment and how you reach consumers. I think it creates a lot of excitement around it. I mean, when you think about kind of like how that's impacted traditional lead gen strategies where people are kind of tracking your every move on the internet and being able to kind of really target market certain individuals based on their personas and their data. That stuff is all changing over time. And I think it's going to dramatically change as more and more technologies come out there. Marketing people are very creative in terms of the way they think about tackling those challenges. The other thing I'd say is talent. Talent is probably the number one thing that really is being, impacted by coming out of this pandemic and what we've seen, because it's allowed us to really lift up our head and think about hiring people. I mean, we have 6,500, 7,000 employees all over the US, Canada, and the UK. But we have a lot of locations where we don't have physical offices. And pre-pandemic, I'm not sure we would have interviewed people thinking about them in geographic locations that weren't necessarily tied to the footprint of the organization. So it's allowed us to really think about going after talent outside of our normal geographic restrictions, as well as provided employees the opportunity to relocate and think about kind of like where they operate from, where they're best and most productive operating. The other thing I'd say is it also allowed us, we've seen this kind of great resignation and a lot of people changing jobs. That's really impacted, the talent market as well. When you think about people with certain skill sets and backgrounds and histories that might not have ever considered insurance brokerage as an option, that really opens up the marketplace a lot. There are a lot of great people with backgrounds. I've seen people join our private client group that have, a master's in fine art. They would have never thought about joining an insurance broker, but because of their background in fine art, they can now come in and work within that private client group in a world of, insuring high-end art collections. I don't think that stuff necessarily would have happened unless the pandemic kind of forced all of those people to start looking at other opportunities out there and rethinking their careers and what really makes them happy and where they can go to kind of be intellectually engaged, as well as leveraging their background that they might not have thought of an insurance career. I know for one, obviously you heard my background. I never thought I'd end up in insurance. But once you get here, there are a lot of really neat areas that you can participate in the insurance conversation with unique backgrounds.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone, Eric, who actually grew up to be in insurance business, including myself and yourself. We do different things, but this is where one of our largest expense of our household is. So it's a huge industry.
Yeah, my real quick, I just to poke fun at myself, my high school yearbook quote was 9 to 5, never, ski bum forever. And now I work in insurance and I live in New York City. So I'm as far away from apparently what I thought I would be back when I was 18 as possible.
But this allows you to ski to some of the best resorts in the world. Okay, so next question is, events like pandemic, they actually influence your attitude and that leads to change in behavior, right? I would have personally never thought that I would be working so much remotely. And I remember after pandemic, when I talked to my team, hey, let's get back to the office. And they all came back, tangentially. And then they said, why do we need to come back to the office? And fortunately or unfortunately, most of our staff is very young people. And they kind of convinced me, and we are very comfortable now. So I want to talk to you about the next generation, right? As some of the millennials, but more importantly, the Gen Zs who have just entered workforce for the first time during pandemic. And I personally see an unannounced war between the corporate America or the employers and the workforce, which is slowly becoming big. They're very comfortable working from home. They do not know the concept that there is a place that you actually go outside home and work. And some of them are to the level that they say that, hey, if my company wants me to come to an office, I'll quit and I'll find another company. So how do you, and I'm sure there are some people in your own team who come from that generation, how do you manage or lead these people? And what is a happy balance for this? And what do you foresee in near future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that seems like kind of the golden question right now. That every business is faced with, and every day you're hearing about different companies out there that are coming out with strong statements around how much they're going to allow people to work from home versus not. So, I think for us as an organization, I mean, this is where it really becomes a broader conversation when you look at the business environment, because we're not only tasked with competing against our traditional insurance broker competitors for talent, we're now dealing with employees that are looking across the business spectrum of different companies taking different positions on that stance. And you have a varying degree of whether people are working from home 100%, or as you have here in New York, as you've seen, Tariq, the big banks that are requiring people to come back in 5 days a week. So there's a broad spectrum right there. And I think, what we've found is going through our experience, we worked mostly 5 days a week in the office pre-pandemic to no days in the office during the pandemic, to where we think we've settled on a pretty happy median in understanding that there is a good opportunity to be able to engage with people in a hybrid environment that hopefully answers both sides of that conversation. Meaning, in a hybrid environment, if you're in the office 1, 2, 3, 4 days a week, our employees have the opportunity to engage with folks in a more personal setting. We're being more deliberate around when teams come into the office so that they're there when other colleagues are in the office. And it's really about us kind of changing the conversation and recognizing that when I look back at my career and when I look back at all the folks that I've kind of admired or folks that have mentored me, their conversations or their commentary has never been around them being the most productive person, which I think is one of the arguments you hear a lot of times for people working from home 100% of the time is, well, I'm really productive. And that's great. I mean, obviously productivity matters quite a bit. But I think for people, young people that are coming out of university or coming out of an advanced degree program, there's a lot more to building a long-term career than just productivity. When I look at resumes and if they had only said I'm the most productive person on their resume, it's probably not necessarily somebody that's going to get that job. Now, productivity is very important, but we want people to understand that growing a long-term career means learning from folks outside of your department, talking to other leaders of the business, randomly bumping into them in the hallway or out at a social event after work in person, and having a little bit more relaxed conversation and personal time to kind of pick their brain about how they handled certain situations and things like that. So I think a lot of it is about changing the conversation with everyone and recognizing that it's okay if we're not the most productive people, which is hard to say as a manager, but you want people to really build a long-term career and feel happy and supported at a business where if they're only working from home full time, I think they miss a little bit of that kind of personal aspect of building a career. And we spend so much time working. When you look at the work-life balance, regardless of how much it sways one way or the other, at the end of the day, it is work life. And so you're always going to have a big component at work. And if you're not happy and engaged and feeling a part of a team and have personal connections, work becomes less of a career and more of just kind of checking a box. So we're real focused on trying to create that right environment. I wouldn't say we're perfect. We haven't nailed it exactly. And with 7,000 employees, we're not going to please everybody exactly the way they want it, but we do try and listen a lot to what our employees need and try and adapt our styles and our policies and procedures to be able to accommodate a lot of different styles and ways that people work. We've got folks that truly we've hired that aren't near one of our actual physical office locations. So they might really want to come into an office, but they don't even have the opportunity to do that. So how do you engage with those employees and how do you make them feel supported and not that they're missing out because they can't even go into an office and engage for a happy hour after the day is over, or, a team meeting in person because they're not even near an office location. So I do think it's a balance. I think it's about changing the conversation now. And I do think the other point I'd make on this is nothing's permanent. For those folks that were in New York City around 9/11, obviously, there was a lot of conversation that no one ever wanted to work in a high-rise building. And if you look at the skyline of New York City, there are a tremendous amount of very tall buildings in this city. And a lot of businesses are back in those tall buildings. And so I'm not saying that we're going to go back to 5 days a week, but I do think over the time, personally, I'm kind of saying, longer term, we'll see where this kind of all shakes out and how people end up adapting to it. And I think, look, on the other side of that, we have to talk to a lot of our folks that want people in the office 5 days a week to kind of explain to them the benefits of giving people that flexibility. And so it's a conversation kind of going both ways.
No, I think that's a great reminder that nothing is permanent. I do remember, after 9/11, how we went through that process. But one thing that I do when I work with a lot of leaders and I coach and I talk to them, especially, this remote working or hybrid model, it has challenged everyone, but more so the working mothers, right? And you are a part of that. You have young children, and of course, you were good enough to come out and help your spouse. But when we look at the corporate leaders or most of the business leaders, who are older age, and they don't have those issues, when people are working remotely, they schedule Zoom meetings or, Teams meeting at 8 a.m. in the morning because they're available. And a lot of mothers may be dropping their children. When we were working in office, we used to have 9 to 5 job and there would be a lunch break at 12. Now we are arranging meetings when we are working remotely. So I tell all the leaders to bring their human touch, and mental health is one of the biggest challenge that a lot of people, people or chief people officer are facing in the companies. What advice do you have for leaders to really bring that humanization in the process when you're leading team? And I know you have team all over the places. You have a big team in Austin, and you live in New York, and you manage and lead these teams. So what advice would you have for those business leaders who are here? How do they bring that sensitivity and understand the challenges that many of the people face working remote?
Yeah, I mean, I do think a lot about it, and it's really about being a good listener. And I think there's kind of two components to that when you're working with teams that are spread out. It's not just about being a leader that has answers for everybody. I think sometimes it's really helpful for some employees to hear or to be able to be heard in a way that isn't always about us kind of solving a problem for them. It's one thing that I think I've learned a little bit over my career, and I'm always trying to get better at it. But when I've got employees that need to kind of voice concerns or talk about an issue, understanding the fine line between them wanting advice and an answer versus just having the opportunity to express their concerns and really explain what's going on in their life. And then, and then as a manager, kind of taking that back and digesting it, but not always having a quick answer for them, is something that I think as managers is hard to do, because you don't want to necessarily be seen as somebody who doesn't have an answer for your employees. But I think it actually works the other way. It can be a little healthy at times when you can say to an employee, I hear you, as opposed to just having an answer to solve their problem. So I think that's a big thing. And then the other thing I'd say is, I mentioned this before, but there are very few great ideas that I have. There are a lot of great ideas my team has. And I end up taking a lot of credit for it because of the role that I play within the organization. But truly, at the end of the day, most of the good ideas that come out of marketing are from my team. And that includes everybody on that team, going down to some of the most newest members of the team that have just joined our company. So it's about kind of like those two components of listening to our team members to be able to kind of pull together all the different information that they're seeing. They're out meeting with sales folks. They're out meeting with the business leaders. There are places I can't be all the time, so they're hearing different stories and strategies, and they're able to share some really good ideas. And then also kind of listening to them from a compassionate perspective and really understanding what they're dealing with.
Okay, great. I encourage all the participants to put your question in Q&A and ask questions. So I have one question from Kate Zadak, and she's asking that, Eric, did you have a coach or a consultant to help you make your decision when you were asked to become CMO? And were you provided any leadership support or coaching once you transitioned to that role?
Kate, great question. And I would love to say that Brian Zidek was the one that coached me throughout my career. Actually, I did. The company was wonderful in terms of providing a couple different opportunities. One of the most helpful things that I went through was a full 360 review process with my team and folks that I worked with, and they brought in outside consultants that were that gave us kind of a good template in terms of folks that I could reach out to that were vendors of ours that we had worked with, executives that I had worked with, colleagues that were on the similar level, as well as a lot of the employees that reported up through me. And that 360 review process, admittedly at times is very challenging as a person to read some, critique and feedback, can be extremely helpful. And especially when I was taking on a new role in terms of that chief marketing officer role, it really gave me an opportunity to kind of digest what I thought my strengths and weaknesses are versus what others perceived as my strengths and weaknesses. And they didn't always line up the same way. So that was extremely helpful in terms of that. And then the other thing I'd say is, and I know he signs my check, so this might sound like I'm just, giving him lip service, but Doug Hammond has been a wonderful mentor in terms of helping guide my career and how I handle situations and the way I think about business and decision making. So, having a boss that really took interest personally in terms of my career development was another big component of kind of how I've gotten to here today. Thanks, Kate.
Great response. And I encourage everyone to just go to Q&A box and put in your question, and I'll ask as many as I can. So my next question to you, Eric, is every leader, and especially good leaders, have a lesson learned from their failure or something they wish they would have done differently. Is there anything that you can reflect upon and see that I wish I knew that before and I would have done differently? Anything that you want to share with the audience that, hey, this is something that now I know, which I didn't know at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it came through a little bit in my point about advice, taking advice. I thought early on in my career that anybody that was more successful than me, or was in a position that was more senior or somebody that I looked up to, that I should just take their advice, that whatever advice they had for me was the right advice. And I learned kind of the hard way at times that sometimes, a lot of those folks don't always know what's right for me. It's a gut check, it's instinct. It's a little bit of like, what's right for me personally in my career, in my life. So, that's one thing I do when I see, newer folks join the organization and I talk to them, my kind of like joking line is, you're going to get a lot of advice, but sometimes the best advice is the advice you don't take. So trust your gut, trust your instinct, ask for a lot of different opinions. Everybody's got an opinion and they're usually willing to share. But at the end of the day, kind of, you don't always have to take the advice that somebody gives you.
Great. So we have a lot of young professionals and students in the audience as well. And what advice you would give them, those who are just starting their career out or about to get into the workforce? When you are hiring new people, what are some of the things that you're really looking for and you're not seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think some experiences of things that have popped up that kind of come to mind is one is especially when you're newer at a company or when you're newer in your career, really being vulnerable and willing to kind of take a risk. We talked about the decisions that I made in my career on when I took risks. I always tell the story that one of our star employees here, Kyle Healy, there was a time period where he was working in one of our subsidiaries, and I approached him and talked to him about a role we were thinking on the corporate team to start up. And I think I got maybe halfway through the description of what I was thinking. And he said, great, I'm on board. I want to do it. I didn't even get a chance to talk about compensation, what it all meant. But that kind of positive nature of like, hey, this is an opportunity. I'll do it no matter what. Like I'll take it on. really stood out to me as like, it was kind of a defining moment of saying like, hey, this is somebody who's willing to kind of take a risk and do something in their career that's not necessarily perfectly defined. So I always tell people, keep your ears open, ask a lot of questions, be willing to try things, because as we've said before, nothing's permanent. So you can do a job for a while and find out that you might not like it, but hopefully you learn a lot along the way. The other thing I'd say is something I kind of learned that I don't think a lot of new people coming out of university really understand, is that companies don't always move as quickly as the employees would like them to. We try and do our best, but with 7,000 employees, stuff sometimes doesn't happen as quickly as you would like it to. And for somebody new in their career, that can be frustrating. You want to kind of keep climbing that corporate ladder. You want to keep taking steps up in your career. Really finding the nuanced difference between being held back and just the normal course of how businesses operate is something that I think younger people really struggle with at times, is understanding which is which. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity or times when companies are holding great employees back and an employee needs to make a decision to leave that company. But I think there are also times where there needs to be a realistic assessment that businesses don't always operate at the same speed as one individual. And I always credit Jeanette Casada, as our head of HR, as kind of, explaining that to me. There were times when I was dealing with employees that wanted to kind of rapidly advance, and how do I handle that? And how do I work with them and make sure that they're supported and have a good career path? And she kind of always hammered that into my understanding of, making sure you understand the balance between how fast companies move and how fast individuals move. So that's, those are a couple key things I would say to folks coming out of school.
No, great advice. And I know Jeanette, and she's pretty good. She looks at things from a different lens and angle, which is very important.
Nobody better.
So I know, Eric, that NFP as a company has been in business of acquiring so many other companies over the years. And there are some entrepreneurs also on probably listening to us or will listen to this. What are some of the things that you're looking in companies when you acquire as an organization? What are some of the key traits that really stand out and that you look for when you're investing in a company?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our M&A strategy is pretty simple. And I shouldn't say simple because there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of diligence and there's a lot of thought process and there's a lot of history of kind of how we've gotten to be a successful acquirer of businesses. But I would say that, with respect to our M&A strategy, Carl Nelson and the team that run our M&A team do a fantastic job, but their biggest focus outside of kind of the tactical execution of doing diligence, financial diligence, and what have you, is that cultural element, and making sure that a business that we're acquiring, has the same kind of cultural aspirations and beliefs in terms of how they treat their employees, whether they put their employees first, and how they treat each other as well as their clients and customers. During pre-pandemic, we were always meeting with all of our acquisitions in person. Obviously, during the pandemic, you couldn't necessarily meet with everybody in person, and we slowed down a lot of our deals. We hit pause on a lot of our deals during that time period because we couldn't meet with people in person, and that's a big component of how we measure a business. When you break bread with people, you really get a good understanding of who they are as people, how they think, how they tick. And so, that paused for a while during the pandemic. And then as things started to open up, obviously we, handled all the safety protocols of traveling in that, but we got back on planes. That team jumped back on planes. Our executive team jumped back on planes, and we went back and closed all those deals that we hit pause on through the pandemic. And I think, there were businesses that were doing a lot of acquisitions that weren't necessarily meeting with people in person. And that's a big component of who we are as a company, as an executive team, and how we approach it. So I think, that's kind of our secret sauce in terms of the M&A strategy.
Great, thank you. And now we have last 7 or 8 minutes left, and now the smarter questions are coming from the students. As I read them, I say, wow, this is really smart. So student LU, she's asking, hi, Eric, I'm wondering how can I define myself as having leadership skills in the workplace when I'm looking for a job rather than having the experience of leadership. So this is a young person who's just starting out and saying, how can I demonstrate that I have some leadership traits?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful question. And I think that when you kind of think about, you know, when I look at folks on our team, and when I think about people that have become leaders on our team that didn't have the history of leadership, you know, what did they do to kind of set themselves apart? And I think, you know, probably one of the key things was, you know, being inquisitive, asking a lot of questions, really, you know, really thinking through and asking a lot of questions before coming up with a solution. You know, I think that kind of like understanding of not rushing to try and produce something really quick, but really understanding a scenario and a situation before you make a recommendation, is a really good indicator of somebody that kind of thinks through problems, you know, listens to others' perspectives, and then provides kind of an answer that is well thought out and knowledgeable. You know, Tariq, you see a lot of folks come through your, you know, through your program. Are there things that stand out on your side that you see students doing in the classroom versus in corporate America?
Yeah, no, I think that was a great question. And my response to her would be that you don't need a job to show your leadership. You know, there are things that you have done as 14-year-old, putting up a soccer team together, or just always share your experience where you can demonstrate your leadership skills. And that's what the employers are looking for. So one of the challenge we have, Eric, now we have 5-6 minutes and we have 5 or 6 questions. So I'm going to try to quickly get them, and we'll give, you know, short answers for that. So Wenjing Ji asked the next question. Hi, Eric. It's a recruitment season for the new grad. Could you please give us some advice about job hunting for the students majored in integrated marketing, and is leadership experience a strength for a candidate during recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that's a little, that's somewhat easy to say in terms of job, you know, job searching and job recruitment. One thing I would definitely say is don't pigeonhole yourself into thinking that any industry is off the table. I sit on a great council with a bunch of CMOs as part of the conference board. And one thing I've learned is that marketing is involved in every single industry and business. And so when you think about an integrated marketing degree, and when you think about kind of where you can go, don't have blinders on in terms of thinking that you should be only at an Apple or a Google or a LinkedIn or kind of one of these really kind of cool technology creative companies. Think outside the box. Think about areas where you can really get experience. You know, insurance brokerage is not going to be the coolest marketing role out there in terms of when you match it up against those big kind of tech players. But there is a lot of great work and experience you can build in terms of working in marketing in random industries that you might not have thought about.
No, great idea. And by the way, I do know your marketing somehow, and they are pretty cool. So you have a very interesting marketing team, and I would love my student to be a part of it. Next question comes from Yang Chen, Karina, and she says that I would like to ask if there are any sources that you can recommend to improve leadership ability to prepare for the real work leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, NYU obviously has a lot of great resources. One thing I don't do enough is, after my MBA at NYU, is kind of going back to those resources. So I would definitely kind of leverage NYU. The other thing I'd say is thinking about different, you know, networking groups that you can join. So finding, you know, folks that are that have networking groups is a great area to kind of open your eyes and broaden your spectrum of understanding, you know, different aspects of business, different traits of leadership, different ways to think about marketing. And so I think, those are kind of like two key areas: is leveraging NYU and then obviously networking groups.
Okay, great. Next question comes from Kei Ling, and she says, what advice do you give to the students who wants to start their own business? As you know that we always love the entrepreneurs. So what advice do you have, and what are some of the traits that you see in early age?
That's a great segue into, I didn't mention it before, but in 2009, kind of coming out of the financial crisis, I almost left NFP. I had finished my MBA at NYU, and I thought, as many kind of graduate students do, that I should go off and start my own business. So I started to go down that path, and Doug Hammond at the time called me and said, "Are you leaving the company? Are you going off to start your own business?" And my heart sunk, because I was like, "Oh boy, he found out." I was on vacation. He said, "Well, why don't you come back from vacation and we'll talk about it?" And I ultimately, obviously, I decided to stay here. So I think I made the right decision. But I did kind of go down a long path of thinking about starting a business. And I think kind of the key things that I learned is, one, think about who those folks are that you're starting that business with. Think about complementary skill sets of people that might bring something to the table that you might not necessarily possess in terms of background or skill sets. Two is, when you're starting a business, this is going to be hard as a marketer, but don't get caught up in a lot of the same things that a lot of businesses that are starting up end up failing over, is because they start focusing on things like, what's our logo going to look like? What's our website going to look like? Make sure you're really focused on the right things when you're starting a business, that you're solving a need, that there is a truly addressable market for that product or service, whatever it is you're providing, and really focus on those key fundamental aspects of business. And don't get caught up in stuff that doesn't necessarily make that business successful at the end of the day. You'll always be able to create a great logo and a website, and that stuff will come. Those are the type of things that sometimes they're easier to focus on when you're going through the process. And I know, because I spent a fair amount of time when we were working on that startup focusing on those things. So that's a big component of, not, losing the forest through the trees, so to say.
No, and I did the same thing. I spent a lot of time in corporate, and it was very difficult transition. But when your heart is calling out, and last 11 years have been most phenomenal years for me. Some people are made for corporate, some people are made for business. But if you have an idea that's itching, don't stop it. My advice usually is to get some corporate experience and then start your own business, but whatever works. We are on the top of the hour. Eric, I want to thank you so much on behalf of NYU, and I would love to get you back at some point in time. And once again, thanks to all the audience who joined us. I would now turn back to Phil for the final comments.
Thanks, Eric.
Yes, thank you both, Tariq and Eric. That was a wonderful conversation, really illuminating. And thank you to the audience as well for your terrific engagement and the questions that you were asking to both of them at the end as well. As we're wrapping up, I hope that you enjoyed this event. And if you did, we have 2 other events coming up in just the next week that I'd like to draw your attention to. On Thursday, we have this masterclass with NYU professor Helio Fred Garcia about crisis communications, also highlighting our new executive master's program in marketing and strategic communications. And then next week, we also have another series that we're really excited about, our Lessons from China series, led by Professor Paul Lin, and he'll be having a similar fireside chat with Stefan Wilmot, former Chief Consumer Officer at L'Oreal China. If you wish to register for this event, you can just scan the QR code on the screen with your phone. And you can also find us on social media as well, where we have been highlighting both of these events as well. And with that, I thank you again for being here, and I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.